welcome to the Kevin Mannix Report. I'm Kevin Mannix, and I'm an attorney in Salem. You may remember me as a fellow who was a state representative for 8 years in House District 32, and tonight I'm pleased to tell you that I'll be running to return to the House of Representatives in the elections this year. But for now, I'm Citizen Mannix, and I'm bringing you the Kevin Mannix Report so we can discuss issues and concerns which face our community in these modern times. Our guest today is a gentleman who has been actively involved for years now in fighting crime in the state of Oregon. His name is Steve Doell, and he is the president of the Crime Victims United, an organization that has been working hard to help sensitize the community about the impact of crime on victims and help us understand better how to deal with criminal justice issues. Welcome to the Kevin Mannix Report.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks for having me.
One of the things I've always wanted to see more in terms of television programs is a better understanding of the people who are in the news, and there are many folks who will read in the paper or see on the evening news something about Steve Doell and the Crime Victims Organization that you work with and where you're now president. And it'd be helpful for us to have a little better idea of you, the person. Can you tell us a little bit about your personal background, where you went to school, that sort of thing?
Sure. I'm a native Oregonian and proud of it. I was born in Portland, Oregon. Basically, I've lived in Oregon all my life, was educated in the parochial school system in Portland, and went on to go to school up in Spokane, Washington, also in a Catholic university. And like I say, have been here basically all my life except for school and the military.
Was that Catholic University Gonzaga by any chance?
Yes, it was, Gonzaga University.
And tell us a little about your business and professional background.
When I graduated from school, I went into the automotive parts industry, what they call the aftermarket industry. And I initially worked for Borg-Warner Corporation, which was a fairly well-known corporation. And after that, I worked for Tenneco Inc. out of Houston, Texas, and worked in their automotive parts division and worked in sales and marketing of automotive aftermarket products.
Now, before the tragedy involving you and your daughter that we'll be talking about, and I shouldn't even say tragedy, tragic for you, but actually we're talking about a deliberate killing. But were you involved in politics before, or how was that?
Well, in a way I have to say I'm ashamed to say I wasn't. I was involved to the extent that I think hopefully most people are. I always voted. I went to the polls and exercised my right to vote. But beyond that, I was not a politically active person.
Well, now let's talk about what brought you into the status of being a member of a victim of crime. And can you tell us in your own words about the situation?
Yes. In October of 1992, on a sunny October day, I had made arrangements. My daughter, her mother and I were divorced, and I had made arrangements with her to pick her up after school or after she returned home to go out and do some shopping with her. And I made a call and talked to her brother, and he sounded very upset over the phone, and I mean more than upset, but sounded very strange. And all of a sudden, the next thing I knew, I was talking to a policeman. The policeman said there had been an accident. I said, involving who? He said it was my daughter Lisa. I asked him, how bad is it? He said, it's very bad. Well, I put it in my mind, very bad, meaning broken bones, some internal injuries. We'd get through this. Well, when I got there, I found out within about 15 minutes after I arrived that indeed she'd been involved in what was then termed a fatal hit-and-run traffic accident. Now, I say that because the next morning the police came to me and said, this is no longer being investigated as an accident, this is being investigated as an intentional killing, which I said, what exactly are you saying here? And they said, we're investigating this as a murder. Most people wouldn't think of a car being used as a murder weapon. We were to find out tragically later that in fact the young man, 16-year-old violent juvenile, did in fact run Lisa down on purpose. And people may say, how do we know that? Well, it was in his own statements. In fact, he said he did it on 3 different occasions. Some people might also say, how do you know he was violent? We have proof of that. We have his writings, and his writings are full of thoughts of violent acts, of murder, of bloodletting, and of sexual violence.
Now, how old was Lisa at the time?
Lisa was 12 years old. She just started junior high school. She was in the 7th grade. And it happened right, for people who think that crime only happens in certain areas, and I don't say this as an elitist, we lived in Lake Oswego. It happened right on North Shore Road in Lake Oswego as she walked in a zone that was, it's a 20-mile-an-hour zone. They figure he hit her in excess of 40 miles an hour. He drove down off the road. She was walking on what I would call the berm of the road. They found tire tracks through people's yards, through people's through their plants, their gardens. It's horrific.
Now, later on, evidence came to light too that he intended to do this. Can you explain that?
Yes. When the police first made contact with him, he told them in a phone conversation that this was prior to the arrest, that they said, we want to talk to you. You've been involved in a terrible traffic accident, a hit-and-run traffic accident. He then proceeded to tell them, no, it was not an accident, I did it on purpose. When they finally made the arrest, they once again asked him the same question. He replied in the same manner. When they took him to the police station for questioning, they were giving him every chance to, I guess you could say, get out of it, or say it was something other than what it was. They put up on a chalkboard, now you hit the girl, we've established that. Let's go through some scenarios. And one was the girl walked out in front of you. 2, you looked away to grab something in the front seat. There was a third one, I don't remember what it was.
So they gave him some options out.
Right, the options were there, but the last option was D, it was intentional. Well, he studied the chalkboard, and this is, by the way, all on the record. And in fact, it's on tape. He studied the chalkboard, he began to giggle, and he said, I think you know which one it is. And they said, no, Andrew, we don't know which one it is, that's why we want you to tell us. He giggled some more and he says, well, it was D, it was intentional.
Okay, so now we have someone who intentionally killed a 12-year-old using his car.
Exactly.
What were the ultimate consequences for him back in 1992?
Well, the consequences in 1992 were, number one, you had to go through what they called a discretionary remand system. So we did not have
He wasn't automatically in adult court.
No.
He was in juvenile court unless they remand him to adult court.
Right, so we did not have for violent crimes a remand system that was automatic. So we had to go through a process that took about 8 or 9 days, which was a court process, which is very similar to a trial, except that there's no jury.
So what happened with that?
With that, they did remand him to adult court.
Now tell us what happened in adult court.
Well, what happened there, as we were told, is that the consequences for murder in those days, for intentional murder, was the maximum consequence was 8 years, well, actually 10 years, but you get 20% good time, which was a given, which he would serve 8 years. Unfortunately, in the trial, we had a juror who got on the panel, who lied to the district attorney about an episode in her life, and she did not hang the jury. The jury did not hang. She told the jury that she did not believe that he did anything. In other words, she was ready to acquit him. And so the jury was not smart enough to hang themselves, so they came out with a verdict of manslaughter. And the manslaughter verdict carried a sentence of 36 months, and of course he got the 20%, so he ended up doing 28 months for ostensibly which was the murder of a 12-year-old child, my daughter Lisa.
So the accountability for this 16-year-old for what he did was 28 months incarceration.
Yes.
Now after that, you became involved in Crime Victims United. Bob and Dee Dee Coons created this organization in an effort to bring about reforms in Oregon years ago because of the death of their child.
Exactly.
You became involved in 1994 with the Measure 11 campaign, which now says that violent juveniles 15, 16, and 17 will be tried in adult court, no ifs, ands, or buts, and which also says if you commit certain violent crimes, you will have mandatory minimum sentences, no good time, no early release. Why did you become involved in that campaign?
Well, it was not only because of the experience that we had in the court system, but I did some investigating, if you will, and I looked at the juvenile system and what had happened in other cases that were similar to ours, either murder cases or rape cases or armed robbery cases or kidnapping cases, etc. And what I found out was incredible travesty of justice that was going on in our state because, first of all, because of the remand system itself. It was a hit-and-miss proposition because of the discretion of the judge and because the criteria was so subjective by which they would remand these violent youth. Give you an example, the situation before our trial, there was 2 youth that took one of their friends up into Estacada on Mount Hood and had him kneel down and shot him through the back of the head, execution style. Well, that judge did not remand that young man to adult court for what he claimed later was a mafia-style hit, mafia-style execution, and he enjoyed it. He ended up staying in the juvenile system. He spent 3 years there for this crime.
And the cap is the age of 21 if you're in the juvenile
exactly.
system. In those days.
And actually he walked at 20 because most of the time they let him out about a year before they were 21 to quote-unquote transition them back into society. So what I'm saying is there was no evenness by which this remand system worked. So I said, the first thing that came to me is if you commit a heinous crime as a juvenile, and by the way, there were already 24 states that had this statute on the books to remand youth in such a manner, that you landed in adult court because you displayed by your behavior that you were capable of adult-type crimes. That was one thing. The other thing that bothered me is that I found that our method of sentencing in Oregon, we'd gone through several different types of sentencing systems, but what struck me is we had a sentencing system that basically said that the discretion of the judges was limited because there was a high and a low in these sentencing factors, and they couldn't go outside of that.
The sentencing guidelines system, which was resource-driven, not justice-driven.
Exactly.
It was established in 1989, and now in '93, you and I worked together trying to get legislation through to change that. We didn't succeed, and we said, okay, the legislature still wants to be resource-driven instead of justice-driven. They don't want to look at sentences that give accountability. We'll go to the voters, and we did that with Measure 11. Now we have Measure 11 in place since April 1 of '95, and we've seen some important statistics, such as from '95 to '96, we moved from 55,000 violent crimes in the state down to 49,500 in round figures, just under 10% reduction in violent crime. Yet the governor recently said that following all that we've done to fight crime, Oregon is not a safer place. Is it because we can't identify the 5,500 people who were not murdered, raped, or assaulted? Why would the governor say Oregon is not a safer place?
I don't know. I have read 2 speeches that the governor has made recently, and of course he has a point of view on this. And without disrespect to the governor, I have a hard time figuring out exactly how he can come up with some of the statements that he made, such as that statement in the State of the Union address or State of the State address, where he made this statement that Oregon is not a safer place. We've not only had this reduction in crime for 2 years.
And in fact,
running.
we've had another year of that reduction plus some.
Right.
So it's more than 11,000 people who weren't victimized in violent crime.
And you're right. We cannot identify these people by name, but we know statistically that we can translate that reduction in crime as a reduction in victimization, in crime victimization. And that's really what our organization is all about.
Good. Now I'm
is
going
that
to
we
pause
want
for a
fewer
moment.
victims. Yes,
and
please.
I'd like to hear about that, but I do want to mention to our viewers that you're watching the Kevin Mannix Report. If you'd like to get in touch with me at any time, feel free to write to me at 2003 State Street, Salem, Oregon, 97301. That's a good old civilian address, 2003 State Street, Salem, Oregon, 97301. I prefer that you drop me a note in the mail rather than call because that is my business address. And at some point in the future, we'll be able to provide you with a campaign phone number if you want to speak to me personally. And I'd always enjoy hearing from you. Now we'll return to you, Steve, and talk about Crime Victims United and how you try to approach the issue of crime, which you were just about to get into.
One of the things that I think you touched on, I think we want to make a strong point with your viewers, Kevin, is that for those people who think we just go out on the street with these initiatives without any thought that goes behind them or without trying to use the system, and I shouldn't say trying to use it because the initiative is part of the system here in Oregon, but we did go, as you stated, we went through the legislature to not only change the sentencing system, but also to get mandatory remand of violent juveniles. And I think I want to make that point again. We tried. As far as the remand system, we had it passed through the House by a 54 5+ vote, I think it was.
Out of 60 members.
Out of 60 members. When we went to the Senate, we had the votes on the floor, but one senator decided that he would use, because of I would call it a pocket veto, or his gavel, or whatever you want to, however
The
you want to
committee
refer
chair
to
for the
it.
committee that held the bill.
Right, the committee chair of that committee, who was at the time Dick Springer, Senator Dick Springer. He was very heavily lobbied by some judges in Multnomah County and some treatment people in Multnomah County, and he would not give the bill a hearing. He finally did give the bill a hearing. He did not give it a work session, so we were blown out of the water. So I think that's important for your viewers to know.
For those who are whining about our use of the initiative process, it's the escape valve that's available to citizens who are fed up with legislative inaction and the combination of politicians who are too weak or too cheap to do something about crime.
And I think that it's important also to note that when Measure 11 passed by 66% plus of the electorate that year,
heavy mandate in favor of this tough
exactly.
accountability.
So the people, there was no doubt about where the people of the state of Oregon, where they were on this issue.
Now, as we look at this issue, and we hear now that there are some folks who are complaining about Measure 11 and attacking it. They want to get out an initiative petition to repeal it. Do you want to talk a little about that? What your reaction is?
Yeah, there are some groups of people now. One is called Pack Up. Ironically, it's Parents Against Cruel and Unusual Punishment, which I would think in ways would be a good name for a victims group. I mean, after all, it was our children, our relatives who have been beaten, murdered, raped, robbed, etc. And another group called FAM, Families Against Mandatory Minimums. These two groups both have come together and put together an initiative petition to repeal all of Measure 11, including the mandatory minimums, the remand of youth to adult court for doing violent crimes, and last but not least, require resentencing of everybody who is currently in the system for Measure 11 crimes.
So say to all these violent criminals, we didn't really mean it, so we're going to open the doors for you now.
Basically what we'd say is we gave you 25 years for murder, but we made this mistake. We didn't really mean it, as you said, and we're now going to let you out in 8 years. We gave you an 8.5-year sentence for first-degree rape because you held a knife to a woman's throat and raped her, but gosh, we're feeling bad about that. Now we're going to go back to 3.5 years like it was before, and on and on. This is exactly what they're driving at. It's interesting to note that Families, I'd like to throw this out, that Families Against Mandatory Minimums was actually an organization that was started on a nationwide basis, and they were actually directed at the federal drug laws. And many of these offenses were non-violent offenses. And when you talk to these people who are associated with Families Against Mandatory Minimums, they're all over the place on this thing, except that their director in this state is just against mandatory minimums no matter what type of crime is committed. And she has no idea what violent crime is all about or how it affects people.
Now, the reason voters imposed mandatory minimums is that the justice system itself has not demonstrated a willingness to be tough, so that a mandatory minimum is the voters' willingness to be tough, but also the political process. If the legislators weren't confronted with those mandatory minimums, they probably wouldn't fund the necessary facilities to incarcerate offenders. They would cop out and back off and find them money to spend on something else. But that raises a question. Are we blowing the budget to spend money on criminal justice? I mean, you hear concerns about how much money we're spending on criminal justice in Oregon.
I smile. This is not a funny subject, but I smile only because you hear this all the time, and of course the people who are opposed to incarcerating people, and believe me, it's a philosophical divide. It's not really about money. It's not really about all the things they say it is. It's a philosophical divide that says we really don't think we should incarcerate people.
But on the money side,
but the money side is interesting.
7% of the entire state budget goes to the corrections system.
7% of our budget, which is, if you look at it, it's $7 out of every $100 that you send to Salem when you have to pay your tax money goes to prisons. Now, for those who think we're taking away from education, remember that $55 out of that $100 goes to education. So now you got the 7 and the 55. I was never great at math, but I got $62 there, and the remainder goes to Health and Human Services and to the Highway Department. Basically, you were the legislator.
Right.
Legislator, you know better than I do. But I think what's interesting is this: I just got a review the other day that really pointed out that we must be doing something wrong in our Department of Corrections here as far as how we spend money, because in the state of Tennessee, they spend $860 million per biennium to incarcerate 16,000 inmates. In Oregon, we spend $700 million per biennium to incarcerate around 8,000 inmates.
So we need to see whether or not we're being cost effective in how we run the system.
Yeah.
There's another statistic that I like to remind people about. We are spending more in state dollars alone on the Oregon Health Plan than we're spending on the entire state system of corrections. I have not included the federal dollars on the Oregon Health Plan, which are much larger than the state dollars. When I mention that figure to people, they're really surprised, and I say, so don't tell me that we're not paying attention to health issues. We're spending more on that than on the entire correction system. And you've already mentioned the education figures. Well, the people out there in the public just hear some total figures to be spent over the next 10 years, and it sounds mind-boggling. I think we've managed to put this in perspective. What do we get for that, though? Can we analyze a little bit about the perspective of the victim? It's not just the person who's killed or raped or assaulted, the family members. Can you give us some insight into how Crime Victims United can reflect those concerns?
Well, first of all, I think it's important for people to know, I think I started to mention before, that one of the main reasons that we exist is so that there are fewer victims. Now that means so that a family like ours doesn't get touched by this type of thing. I think that you have to look at that, though, that this is not just an issue of dropping the crime rate, but it's an issue of when you incapacitate violent criminals. Again, how many victims does that save? How many fewer victims do we have when we have murderers, rapists, and people who commit heinous assaults, such as a situation that I think most of your viewers know about in Hillsborough, where these young men took a baseball bat to somebody in almost a manner that was unprovoked, except that the guy said, "Please don't throw bottles."
And he said that the day before.
Christmas tree lot, right? And they have a whole day to think about this. For those who say, well, youth are just impulsive. Now these kids left there that night, had almost 24 hours to think about this thing, to plot it, to premeditate it, and they return with baseball bats, and they nearly kill this individual.
And now we can say, it's unfortunate that we have to say it, but thank God for Measure 11, because they will be tried in adult court, and they will be subject to mandatory minimums for permanently incapacitating this man. They're lucky they didn't kill Mr. Underwood, the victim. And the family impact on his family, all the time they've had to spend, all the pain and suffering they've suffered. These were innocent civilians, and I like to refer to it as in our war on crime. And the combatants are the combatants that we're up against are the violent criminals that we're dealing with. But if we try to put this all in perspective, isn't it true that the folks who are in favor of accountability, such as you and I, have nothing against prevention, but there's some other folks who seem to think that all you should do is try to deal with prevention and have no accountability?
Listen, if we can find a way to prevent people from doing crime, whether it's violent crime or property crime, that's great. But we still have to face the fact that just because we open the front door to prevention, that doesn't mean we open the back door at the same time and start letting people out of prison just because we're going to put a prevention mode in. And I think it's important to say this right now, that while I'm for prevention, that doesn't mean we take this prevention money as a chunk of the corrections department to use it. There's other places, I think, in the budget where you get into prevention. You do it in the education department. You do it in the health and human services department. But if it's going to be taking away from corrections, and I have a problem with that. But I think you still have to have, you can do all the preventing you want, but what do you do? What if you have 5 people and you prevent, they're at risk, and 4 of them you keep out of a life of crime, and this one here decides to commit a murder or a heinous assault or a rape?
You still got to have the accountability.
We've got to have prisons. I mean, where are you going to, I always like to ask, where are you going to put them? To the people who don't want to build prisons, where are you going to put them? Do you want them next door to you? I know some people that have people living in a halfway house in Portland, because they're putting them in Portland, right behind them, that have a murderer, a couple of rapists, an arsonist, and an armed robber. believe me, these people are not too happy about that, and I don't think anybody out there would be. So where are we going to put these people?
Well, now you're engaged in another campaign this year. The ballot title is still being worked out to be finalized. It's because the criminal defense lawyers challenged it, which always slows down the process, to deal with repeat offenders. I should say, in fact, you and I are engaged in this, but I'd like you to explain a little bit about what we're trying to do with repeat offenders and major offenders as to property crime.
Well, I think there's a very interesting fact that I'd like to state before we get into the.
I'll just mention we have 3 minutes left.
Right, to the initiative itself, and that is that for those who think that incarceration has no effect on people committing crimes, while we've seen this decrease in the violent crime rate, last year we had a 10% increase in property crimes in Oregon.
Because Measure 11 doesn't affect those.
Right. For the previous 2 years, and you can go to the FBI crime index on this if people want to check me out, we also had near 10% increases. So you could say basically we've had a 30% increase in the last 3 years. Now the question that is begged at this point is, why is this happening? Well, in Portland, you steal a car, and by the way, Portland's the 24th largest metropolitan area in the United States, and we have the 3rd highest car theft rate in the United States. Well, the reason is because when you steal a car in Portland, you get a citation for it. It's like a traffic ticket. It says show up in court, you show up in front of a judge, and you're going to get a probation for it. And usually this happens until about the 4th or 5th time you steal a car, and then all of a sudden about the 4th or 5th time they may hit you with a 30 or 60-day jail sentence, not prison, in the county jail. Well, we all know what the problems are with the county jails, and the likelihood of these people spending more than 4 to 7 days is slim to none.
So we have no accountability in Oregon, no serious accountability for property crimes.
Right, burglaries. These are the crimes that people are more likely to be touched than violent crimes. I think there was 200,000 plus property crimes in the state of Oregon last year and about 50,000 violent crimes.
Doesn't also beg the issue to call it a property crime because there's always an owner of that property, there's someone who is using that property. If your car gets stolen, it's pretty personal, or your home gets broken into, it's pretty personal. You weren't physically assaulted,
right,
but you were personally assaulted. Well, we're talking about this measure, the kind of accountability that we have. There's a 16-month guideline sentence for the first conviction. Then for the next conviction, you have a mandatory minimum of 1 year added. Then the next one, you have a mandatory minimum of 2 years added. So it's a cumulative mandatory minimum for repeat offenders.
Exactly. And I think that's important for people to know, is that we are giving these people a chance on the first offense. They do get a presumptive in which the judge has a full range of options available to them, from incarceration to probation to treatment to whatever they want to do. But what we're saying is that past that, once you become a chronic property offender, that you are going to get a mandatory minimum.
Okay. Well, with that, Steve, I want to thank you very much for being with us on the show today.
Thank you, Kevin.
I wish you and me luck with that initiative to deal with major
Well, I wish the people
offenders.
of Oregon luck.
We hope to get it on the ballot for November. And I really appreciate the viewers who have joined us again for the Kevin Mannix Report. I look forward to being with you for some time to come. Take care of yourselves. Godspeed.
Hello, I'm Senator Marilyn Shannon. Please join me every Thursday evening at 6:30 p.m. on CCTV 25, and we'll discuss the political issues.
Hi, this is Senator Gene Derfler. Please join me on CCTV Channel 25, 6:30 Wednesday evenings to discuss the issues. We'd be happy to have you join us.